That makes my life a lot easier. My mother used to say that I'll never need a microphone I take after my father. I don't know if that's true or not. Well, thank you, Paul. Paul, you mentioned interest that I have in sports, and obviously you haven't seen my golf swing. So, but I do. I love sports, and I want to again thank Archbishop Schnurr for his graciousness in this invitation. I have a couple of things that I wanted to talk to you about. Obviously, we have, I think, a total of about 50 minutes. And so I want to use a portion of that in hearing from you. And by that I mean, if what I say sparks a question or a comment or even a disagreement, of course I want to hear that. So we want to have time for that. But even in some ways more importantly, I'm such a fan of the sports league that I'd like to hear, even initially, from one or more of you on what is the opportunity that you're taking home with you? What's the possibility that you've learned about? I'm selfish. I didn't go to the whole setting, so I'll have the cream of the crop. In other words, I'll benefit by what you're saying because I want to take those things with me. If time allows, and we've done that, and you want to share with me what you see within our culture or within our church of the greatest challenges for what I call, and I know you're fond of calling this sports ministry. I like that. I like the fact that you even say you're promoting. I didn't even say thanks to Lou. Lou, thank you again for the invitation to this. Don't you talk an awful lot about director of sports ministry?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I like that idea, and it's something that expands my thinking. I don't think I ever would have thought of that when I was myself involved a little bit in sports, so that it was a ministry, but yet I think that is true. Well, let me back up a little bit then and talk a little bit about background. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. And we have lots of sports going on in Louisville, Kentucky, but we especially have a little horse race that goes on every year. Now, this horse race, I usually gave this little true story to people. Has there been anybody here who's not heard me speak and give that story that happened to me 3 years ago? Okay, good. All I need are 3 hands. There are 3 hands, I tell the story here. So I go to the Kentucky Derby, really, what I would say religiously, I go in my collar. And I got into an elevator that was taking me up to the free ticket that I got. And as I got in the elevator, there was a man, just one man in the elevator, and he looked at me and he looked at my collar. He said, "Father, are priests allowed to vet?" And I said, how I was thinking of answering, I said, well, I think we're allowed to vet, but we're not allowed to win. And he said like this. He said, "I believe I may have a vocation." And I said to him, "You know what? You are quick." That's very, very good. But I thought of it because how often do you have somebody who's involved in sports and who is involved especially in coaching or administration who would actually refer to what they're doing as a calling, as a vocation? And yet I think that that's a little bit what we're about here. We're about stretching our understanding of what, not so much what initially attracted us to what we're doing, but rather what keeps us doing what we're doing. And they're both essential questions. There's the question of what attracted me originally to be zealous as a priest, as Paul, thank you for mentioning 44 years ago. You know what? I'm starting my next 44 years, and I love it. I love it. But so I answered that question, what attracted me initially? How did Christ move my heart to this? But there's a more important question. what makes me, when I get up this morning, do it? And it's not always exactly the same. Hopefully it gets a deeper answer the older we get. So I think that's very important. I also want to tell you one other little story that I think you'd find helpful, because we're talking about sports. We're talking about something, quite frankly, that's meant to be enjoyable. Quite frankly, it's not meant to be tension-filled. It's not meant to give us ulcers. And so I heard a story recently of a family that they had a little 4-year-old, 5-year-old child, and they thought, well, it'd be good for him, our child, to have a pet. So they got a little kitten. So mom was downstairs, and upstairs was the bathroom. And the bathroom door was closed, and from behind the bathroom door, mom heard this screaming. She recognized it was the kitten. Johnny, she said, what in the world are you doing up there with our kitten? He said, Mom, I'm baptizing our kitten. She said, Johnny, don't you know that kittens hate water? Johnny said, Mom, he should have thought of that when he joined my church. now I like that, because I think there's a lesson there. How do we make sure, take a temperature gauge every step of the way, to make sure that sports remains enjoyable? That doesn't mean that it doesn't bring out discipline. It doesn't mean that it doesn't really challenge people to dig deep and understand their talents, the same way as someone taking violin lessons when they're only 6 or 7 years old are developing a skill, and it's hard work, but the more they work hard, the more they will literally enjoy playing and enjoy music. Well, sports is the same. Doesn't mean that it's not planned and structured. I'm telling all of you, you know this better than I do. But it is meant to be recreation. It's meant to be, we use the word, recreation. It's meant to recreate the human spirit, to bring out the best in people. So I have this desire to speak about the book by David Brooks on the road to character. How many of you already read that? Come on. 3 hands? Wow. This is a gold mine. I wish I were in sales. Do you know who David Brooks is? You see him once in a while on C-SPAN or on some of these programs. David writes, he's an editorial writer for, I guess, still the New York Times. And so about a year, maybe it's only about a year ago, he wrote, one of his books he wrote is called The Road to Character. It's really worth reading, especially if you're involved in the formation of people. I have a little quote here. Let me see if I can find it. These darn paper clips get in the way sometimes. By the way, when I get moving here, if it's 9:30 and I'm still talking, who's got a watch that they can? Who knows how to whistle? Anybody here? Would you do it? Okay, 9:30. I won't be talking at that point. We'll be in conversation, but you never know. So here's David Brooks wrote this beautiful thing. He talks an awful lot about us living in a narcissistic age, in which he says young people are in many ways have so many advances to the things that occurred when he was growing up in the 40s, 50s, 60s. There's so many opportunities today. There's a goodness in our young people. We all know this is not true. But he said there's a downside. And he said one of the downsides is young people are just too sure of themselves. It's part of the culture. It's part of the water they drink. It's not their fault in many ways. In some ways, it's the responsibility also of parents. But the young people are just so sure of themselves. I see this when we hire people for work. I have to keep reminding them, including some of our newly ordained priests, by the way. I have to remind them, hey, remember, you're going to be working with some seasoned people. You're going to be working with people who have, I don't usually say 44 years because then they'll think I'm talking about myself, but I say who have 20, 30, 40 years of experience under their belt. Approach that person like Moses approached the burning bush. You got stuff to learn. Why would you not want to learn? Well, that's not a natural instinct today. David Brooks talks about that. That's worth reading. Now, one of the things he says very early in his book is he talks about two kinds of virtue, and I think you all have been talking about virtue. He talks about resume virtue and eulogy virtue. Resume virtue and eulogy virtue. You probably will already know the quote, guess what he's going to say. See if I can find it. That's from another one. The problem when you don't have a podium. Here it is. This is Paul. You're awfully good to do that. See, this is why everybody likes him. He says resume virtue are all about the talents needed to get ahead in life. Eulogy virtue, about the deep and lasting ones that follow us into eternity and stay in the hearts of those who remember us after we die. Just think of what he just said. Eulogy virtues are those things that follow us into eternity. They don't end in the grave. And that cause people to remember us after we're gone. We're talking about real permanence. So he talked about things like integrity, understanding, bravery, honesty. He said these virtues lead to self-respect rather than a brash self-confidence. He's not saying we shouldn't be self-confident, but he's saying there's a brash self-confidence where you're almost cocky. You know what I'm talking about? And he said, no, what we want is a self-respect. The difference is this. Self-confidence means I'm better than anybody else. Self-respect means I'm better than I used to be. You see the difference? And so you were all watching the Final Four. My pool is shot. It is shot. I even saw someone in one of the pools pick Yale. How in the world did they know to pick Yale? Right? But in any event.
They don't follow basketball.
Yeah, that's right. That's what it is. That's what it is. So, but in any event, that's not an indication of our intelligence that we don't do well on. So I listened to when they were talking about Roy Williams and what Charles Barkley said. Did you hear that interview the other night? So much so that I wrote it down. I thought I'm going to bring that up when I get here. Because Charles Barkley said, and I saw a special which talked about the difficulties. You know, he went to Auburn, and the difficulties that he had. He almost transferred from Auburn to Alabama because of his tense relationship with the coach. And he said this. I even wrote it on a separate piece of paper here. Talking about Marcus Page, and by the way, yes, I have two pools, and I do have North Carolina for one, so I still have an outside shot. He talked about Roy Williams' relationship with Marcus Page, and he said, well, what's a coach supposed to do? He's supposed to make the players into a better man. Now, he's not talking with the men's things, it could be a better woman. Better man, and make sure they graduate. I thought this was a very interesting thing. One of my friends, some of you may know Billy Reed. Did any of you know Billy Reed? Did you ever hear of Billy Reed? Billy Reed worked for the Sports Illustrated as a writer. for decades. He worked for the Courier Journal. He's published some books, including some on that little horse race that I talked about. Billy's from Louisville. He actually teaches the Academy of Excellence, I think it's called, at Georgetown College. Do you know him, Lou? I don't know. You know him.
He's a good man.
He is a good man. Well, Billy and I talked an awful lot about virtue, and he said, you know, the cockiness of people who are getting million and million dollar contracts and are being the idols. I think there's a break in the line right now. I think there's more interest now in calling for wholesome models and ideas. And I think that interview with Charles Barkley was one such example. So I raised that for your consideration. I also want to talk to you about two other people because I think in many ways, if we're going to talk about building character, to me, the game is that we want 10 years from now, people giving talks and mentioning your name. We want you to be a witness and a model of what ought to occur in sports. When I give talks at confirmation, you know the drill for us in confirmation is our kids, most of them are in 8th grade, and they all choose a sponsor, or what I would like to call a mentor. And I like to read what the young people write about who they chose as a sponsor, because it usually tells you not just about the sponsor they chose, it tells you about what was important for that young person. It probably tells you more about the young person when they describe who they chose. And I say to the young people, something that one of our pastors said, and I thought that was right on board. He said, listen, wouldn't it be great if within 6 years, someone approaches you, 8th grader, who now are going to be in college, and says, would you be my sponsor? This is about a very personal community that we're talking about. The ability to raise up witnesses. And that's basically what the Easter season's about. You know I'm Catholic, right? So you know that I'm going to be talking about the faith, etc. Of course you do. So I mentioned the Charles Barkley because I'm thinking, when you get into sports medicine, or sports leadership, you almost, your mind begins to pick up things differently. A lot of people probably listened to that interview about Roy Williams, but they didn't necessarily pick up what Charles Barkley said. But that's what you and I will be doing more and more because of this interview. We will be looking at our culture, and we will be identifying the people on whom to build. That's really what this is about. It's about finding the people on whom to build. And by the way, you know in the corporate world, you can teach a lot of skills, but you know in big corporations what the headhunters are always looking for. They always ask, tell us what values you want. If we're going to propose a new person for CEO, tell us your major values. What is your mission? What are the values? Because you really can't very quickly teach values. You can bring out values that are dormant. We all know that we've met people who, gosh, you think that person's the most selfish person that I've ever met. And then when you get to know them, you realize, given the opportunity, you can bring out some real good things in someone. So we know that. But in general, you really need to build on people who already have strong values. They can learn skills. But the value, if you're going to concentrate on character building, needs to be essential. So I'm going to mention two people, and this may take a good bit of my time because we've got the bell's been rung. And the first person I want to talk about is he's a teacher in a public high school in Louisville. He did teach at Trinity, but he now teaches, I think it's at Mayo. He teaches science. And his teaching ability and his effect will have an effect on the kids he is teaching is so great that I think it was CBS did a special on him. And this special, I don't know if it was 60 minutes, I forget now, but this special is about 12 minutes, and it's being shown by YouTube all over the world. He's very creative in the way he teaches, but for some reason, the thing that draws people is the young people he's teaching seem to trust him. I hope they're not getting somebody.
They might be. We were warned not to go out that door.
Not to go that way, okay.
Yeah, don't go out that door.
I'm just going to say, note to self.
Yeah, they told us on Friday.
Don't go out that door. Wow. Yeah. The Benedict really runs a pretty tight ship here. Jeff gave a talk at our men's conference that we just had a couple of weeks ago. Jeff White was his name. The thing that built his credibility, believe it or not, was the fact that well after he was teaching, because he's been teaching for a long time, he and his wife had a son with special needs. His son's about 16 years old. Adam is confined to a wheelchair. And Jeff did not, I preached this morning, Jeff didn't set out to be a person of courage. He just wanted to do the right thing. He wanted to be a witness for Christ. And so Jeff ends up, after he teaches, he ends up carrying his son up to bed, and down again. He has a special car that takes him to the place he goes to school. He pretty much lives around that, and as I was watching this, I thought, you know, it's one thing to be trustworthy, but it's another thing to build credibility. They're two different things. They're both essential. One is to be trustworthy. That means that you really do have the young people that you're, and I'm presuming you're coaches, but I know some of you are administrators, but let me say it as if you're a coach, okay? Just, it makes it a little easier. That you really desire to help shape and form the character of these young people. You see this as really a responsibility and a privilege that you have. So you're trustworthy. But there also needs to be the ability to build credibility. That has to be believable. Now, when I was watching Jeff, and by the way, he gave a great talk. He got me up at one point, and he's a science teacher. He said, Archbishop, put your hand on this, something that looked like a little thing showing electricity or something. It was a little warm. And I put my hand on it. And then he had me hold a fluorescent light in the center. And the light lit. The electricity was going through me. Well, of course, he's using these experiments to get everybody's attention. And he's showing all his interest and his love of science and his love of the kids. But as I said, it was his personal witness in his own family, the way he went an extra step with his son, that really has, I think, made young people want to open themselves to him, open their hearts to him. And if you have a chance to see it, if you just go to Jeff Wright on the YouTube or just on Google, you'll probably come up with that video. It's worth seeing. It's about 12 minutes long. The lesson. We need trustworthy leaders, but we need leaders who, through their witness, show credibility. And that can't be faked. All you have to do is look at the life you have and say, well, how are you being a witness? You're not doing it to show off, but you're doing it to be consistent. Jeff Wright, a great person, I think, to be able to examine. The other person I'd like to give is Dr. Jerome Lejeune. How many of you have ever heard of Dr. Jerome Lejeune? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8.5. Okay, good. This is a gold mine then. I forgot to bring to bring the book, but I just did a column on Dr. Jerome Lejeune. Oh, here, over here. And it's actually going to be, it's online right now. If you want to go to Archbishop Kurtz blog, you can see it and read it. If you subscribe to the Record, which is our Catholic newspaper, you can read the column for next week. But here's what I called it. I called it Dr. Lejeune's Heroic Virtue. Dr. Lejeune was born in France in 1926. He died in 1994. He was a father of a family, 5 children, loving wife. He was a doctor who always wanted to be a family doctor, country doctor, and he was a geneticist. I read I saw a video, and in fact, if you go to this talk that I'm giving, at the end of it, or the article that I wrote, if you go to the end of it, there's a way to get the video if you were interested, if you're really interested. I'd have to really do very well for you to be interested in watching a 1 hour and 10-minute video. But maybe one of you, who knows, you might get inspired. The book that was written, which is entitled Life is a Blessing, was written by his daughter, Clara. So he was growing up, he was going to know, should I be a family doctor? Should I be a geneticist? Here's what he said to his wife when he was writing to her. She was from Denmark, and he wrote a letter to her right before they got married, and talked about not so much being a hero as much as seeing life as an adventure. That notion of seeing your life as an adventure. He said this. He said, if you agree to live this precarious but just and wholesome life, I am sure we can succeed. So you already knew he was wanting to do things for others. So he started to investigate things. He began to study people who had what we now call Down syndrome. You're familiar with Down syndrome. Now you have to understand my personal involvement because my older brother George had Down syndrome. And when our mother died in 1989, I was already a pastor back in Pennsylvania. And Georgie and I lived together. We lived together for 12 years. And he went on to Knoxville as the bishop. He came and he lived for 2 years. He died right before he turned 61. A wonderful person. So I had kind of a vested interest in Down syndrome. So you got to remember that at that time, in the 50s, people with Down syndrome were told to have Mongolism. It was called Mongolism because they thought that the features of the person looked very much like someone who was from Mongolia. I wrote in my article, before his discovery, and by the way, he did a discovery in 1959 of the genetic cause of Down syndrome. You know that human beings are born with 46 chromosomes, and they're in pairs, one from the wife, one from the husband. And the 23 pairs, 2 makes a pair. Except that someone with Down syndrome, the 21st pair actually has 3. And so he called his discovery trisomy 21, 3 of the 21st pair. In the book that I was reading, it said he'd have been more known today if he just called it Lejeune syndrome. I thought, yay, I never thought of it. But this is a little bit of a hint into his character. There was humility. Now, one of the things he did through the 50s is he would spend the morning meeting families that had a child or an adult with Down syndrome and their families. And you could imagine, I can think of it with my own mom and dad. If they knew somebody had an interest, you better believe they would be going to learn more, right? So he did this in the morning, and then he did his experiments. Do you know what he called the people that he was meeting? He called them the disinherited. They were the ones that people, in fact, what I wrote here is before his discovery, it was thought that people born with this syndrome had a disease, were a punishment to the parents, and should be kept in the shadows of society. And now, after this discovery, he wasn't looking, by the way, to become a hero. He was looking to be holy, and he was looking to have a good family, and he was looking to contribute, but not to be courageous. He somewhat backed into it, because he discovered in the 60s that all of a sudden his finding could allow people to detect earlier that a child in the womb had Down syndrome, and it could lead to their destruction. And so in 1969, he went to San Francisco in order to get an award. It was the William Allen Memorial Award. I'm not sure who William Allen is. I know there was who was the guy who was the Redskins coach? George Allen. That's the only Allen I knew. So I don't know who William Allen was, but he got the award for William Allen. And one of the people at that, a doctor and a geneticist, said when he gave the talk, there were, he said, there were 2 earthquakes that happened. The first is there literally was the shaking of the building, which I guess if you go to San Francisco and you don't experience an earthquake, you feel like you were let down. You know what I mean? There's just so many. So there was, but they went to the thing, and that's what. But he said the second was when he spoke about the humanity of children with Down syndrome. And he even said, and this is quoting now, are you familiar with the prologue of the Gospel according to John? Yeah. I don't know how over religious you all are, but you know the part in the beginning was the word. You know that part where it starts in the beginning was the word. What he said, he's talking about genetic passage. I also quoted it here. Let me see if I can get it. When he gave the talk, he decried the possibility that some may want to take the life of a child with Down syndrome before that child was born. His research made it clear to him that the genetic package of a human was set before conception, or as he said, in the beginning there was a message, and this message is in life, and this message is life. And if the message is a human message, then the life is a human life. That cost him probably the Nobel Peace Prize. And it cost him a slew of government contracts and things. He was blackballed except for the Catholic Church because he became a friend of St. John Paul II. In fact, in 1980, I guess, or 82, I'm trying to think of when the attempted assassination was on our Holy Father. But some of you remember that he was shot. Well, that morning is when our Holy Father met with Jerome Lejeune and his wife. Lejeune was on his way back in a plane to France when they got word of the attempted assassination. They became very, very close friends. In fact, Jerome Lejeune, 33 days before he died, was named president of the Pontifical Academy for Life. Now, why do I take the time to mention someone like Jerome Lejeune? Because we want someone 10 years from now to give a talk and mention your life. I mean, it's that important. Not that you are attempting to become famous, but rather that you're attempting to become a witness. You're saying it is precious for parents and young adults to, in a sense, place their lives in my hands, to trust me, to help form and shape character, to help them understand what it means to think about a eulogy virtue as opposed to only a resume virtue. And I want, and I hope you'll say this in your heart, I want to be seen as trustworthy. I want to be credible. I want, and that is put yourself out on the limb a little bit, because not any one of us is perfect at that. And I'll make it another point. You may not have gotten on the bus for that reason. You may not, if you're involved in this work for 2 years or 25 years or 30 years, when you first said yes, you may have said yes for many different reasons. You needed a job, or you had an interest in sports, or you just loved competition. But all of a sudden, and this is the way the movement of the Lord is with the gift of grace, He changes people. And that's what this conference is about, the capacity to change you. I wrote down here that of areas, I got 2 minutes now. See, I knew I was going to come back with it. I can't get to all of it, but I wrote down here, okay, if I were to be in your position, what would I want to do? Well, the first thing that I would want to do is make sure I'm making a decision on the deepest level possible. That, in other words, you're in this business because of the effect that can occur through you in the lives of young people, their character. Secondly, I think I would say I need as much formation as possible. I'm like that caterpillar that's not yet a butterfly saying, be patient, God isn't finished with me yet. You know that poster that they have. That we need formation. We can't just tell other people to be formed, but you and I need to be formed. And in fact, they're going to take seriously their own formation to the extent that they see you witnessing to it. And thirdly, that you want to surround yourself with people who support the right things in your life. When I give confirmation talks, I say to people, the young people, I said, for the next 4 years that you're in high school, the first decision that you're going to make is what friends you choose. That's it's your parents will agree with me, it's so important that you choose friends who will be good friends, and you know who a good friend is. A good friend is the person who brings out the best in you. So I would suggest that you and I, as adults, we need to model it. We need to look at who are the good friends in our lives, who's bringing out the best in us. And so having that support. And the third thing that I would look at saying is, I would want to get up in the morning, and in my prayer, I would want, do you pray or not? I don't mean perfectly, I don't pray perfectly, but I do pray. And I would want to be able to say every morning, Lord, make me a good witness. You know what the right things are, but make me a good witness today, because life is messy, and it never goes on a straight line. And there's always surprises, but make me a good witness. They're the 4 things, if I were sitting where you are the things I would say. Right? Because we hit it. Okay, we hit that. So I was going to talk like longer on that, but I'm not. So we're going to stop. Let me stop right there, and let's just take a minute. I know you're going to hate this, and I apologize ahead of time, because they said that when you and I are at the final judgment, there's judgment. You know that, right? When we're at the final judgment, those on the right, the Lord will say, "Come, I have prepared your eternal reward for you in heaven. And he'll say to those on the left, form small groups. You've heard that. You've heard that. You know what I'm talking about. So all I would say, so I know, I appreciate that. I appreciate that.